just a visionary and a heart and brilliant. I'm Erica Miners, and I'm a member of Critical Resistance and Education for Liberation Network. I'm just honored and humbled to be here today. Again, at another critical juncture, centuries of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color organizing, usually led by women and or queer folks, and often at great personal cost, have brought us here. Demands to defund police and invest in community, particularly to fund Black futures, to use the frame of the Black Youth Project, reverberates from Minneapolis to Oakland, from Toronto to Brisbane. The labor of many, particularly Black feminists, has made abolition imaginable and tangible. So, as a reminder and to ground our conversation today, abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a vision or a goal. As Critical Resistance reminds us, the prison industrial complex is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. About what we want and need to build, as much as it is about what we will dismantle. This is particularly important as we talk today about defunding and dismantling police in schools, removing police and immigration and customs enforcement and other arms of law enforcement and surveillance and policing from our schools and communities is only part of the abolitionist equation, as the organizers on our call today know intimately. Our struggle is also what we must collectively build and invest in. For example, meaningful feminist and queer affirming sexual health education, school funding formulas that do not hoard resources and opportunities in the whiter and wealthier pockets and regions. We need more and better paid Black, Indigenous, Brown teachers, school staff, and leaders. We need more educators and school personnel supported to practice mediation and conflict resolution. We need more poetry and art teachers, more books, libraries, and the list goes on. So abolition has always been as much about building as it's been about dismantling. So before I turn to Stephanie to start our conversation, we also know that many viewers are involved in active campaigns around abolition in schools. So we encourage you to use the chat function in whatever format you're engaging in to share whatever resources, campaign information, URLs for organizations, reports, posters, flyers, or via Twitter with the hashtag Lessons in Liberation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Huptom, and I am a doctoral student in the Department of Social Justice Education at the University of Toronto. For the past 2 years, myself, Farima, Erica, and others have been involved at the Education for Liberation Network and the Critical Resistance Working Group on Education and Abolition to be creating resources across different contexts to build what's called the Lessons in Liberation and Abolitionist Toolkit for Educators, which will be released in 2021 by AK Press. This toolkit documents how educators, young people, organizers, and communities are building and practicing abolition in their schools and neighborhoods. With examples and analysis of grassroots campaigns, first-person narratives about curricular projects, and descriptions about restorative, healing, Indigenous, and transformative justice practices in classrooms. Our hope is that this toolkit will not only function to generate dialogue and practice, but it'll also be used to elevate and network the politically urgent moment that is in the process in our schools and our neighborhoods. This webinar, which is the second of a 3-part series that we've been hosting in June, lends itself to the conversations that will be held in this toolkit. Before we begin, I just want to say some very due thank yous. Thank you to our ASL interpreters, Sean Merriman Roberts and Rodney Laban, as well as Daryl Morell, who is providing closed captioning for our event. To Farima Khorshid, Shiva, and Chrissy Hernandez, who have helped to organize this panel, as well as Emily Batista and everyone from Hala in New York City, who will be moderating our next webinar on youth organizing, which will be held on June 30th, as well as Hoalehi Organista, who is helping with the technical aspects of broadcasting our webinar this evening. I would like to invite our panelists to join us on the screen and thank them, of course, for joining us, for being here. We have Jackie Byers, the founding director of the Black Organizing Project in Oakland, Edgar Ernesto Ibarra Gutierrez, who is the program and leadership coordinator for Milpa and Salinas, California, Jen Johnson, the chief of staff at Chicago Teachers Union, and Andrea Vasquez Jimenez, the co-founder and co-director of Latinx Afro-Latin America Abya Education Network here in Toronto. I'll have you leave for one moment and then I'll invite you back shortly. To access cart captions for our event, if you need closed captioning, please visit our stream text event site, which is www.streamtext.net//event=EFL. The link was also sent out to everyone who's registered by Eventbrite and is included in our YouTube page description box. You can also find the YouTube stream description box full bios for all our panelists. The hashtag tonight, as Erica had mentioned, is hashtag lessons and liberation. And we encourage you to, as you are listening, share resources with one another there or in the comment box below. And we just want to issue that some of our panelists may offer some words in Spanish, and so we do apologize in advance if that is not picked up in our cart captioning our ASL interpretation. All right, I will invite Jackie, Jen, Andrea, and Edgar back onto the screen. Okay, so we were going to get our conversation started. While all of you and your organizations have been working for a long time, your campaigns are at different places. And so it's helpful for us and to those who are listening and are interested in strategies for organizing towards abolition in schools to hear about the different places your campaigns are at and know a little bit more about it. So to begin, can you please each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your local organizing that you're currently part of, specifically as it pertains to defunding or divesting from police in schools. And we can start with Andrea.
Hi, thank you for having me here. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Vasquez Jimenez. I'm a community organizer and co-founder and co-director of the Toronto-based from Canada, Latinx Afro-Latin America Abya Education Network. We were a lead organization that pushed for the successful removal of the School Resource Officer, SRO, aka Cops in School program in 2017 at the largest school board in Canada, the Toronto District School Board. Currently, I'm a lead organizer with our Latin campaign for police-free schools Ontario-wide, hashtag police-free schools ON-wide, across all educational levels, including post-secondary campuses. We know that regardless, whichever name the Police in Schools program comes packaged in, whether that be the SRO program, the School Engagement Team program, Police Liaison Officer program, Student Liaison Officer program, or Campus Police Special Constable program in post-secondary campuses, we know that the detrimental effects are still present. The importance in elevating right now, LN, elevating this to a provincial issue is precisely because of the issue of police in schools, and the school to prison pipeline is not an isolated or local issue. It's not a one school board issue or one post-secondary campus issue. It is a systemic issue and a global issue. And that demands a systems response. And currently in our case, the provincial government is able to mandate police-free schools across educational levels. We know that having healthy, equitable, police-free schools is a public health issue and is a labor issue. And it speaks to the larger systemic issues of the underfunding and under-resourcing of educational spaces that have been ongoing for decades. Not only are police-free schools fiscally responsible and a professional obligation, It also moves beyond that because it is indeed a legal obligation. It is a human right. And the continuation of police in schools is gross negligence and an ongoing human rights violation. To finish off, one of our frameworks that we do take up comes from our partners in the US in the International Movement for Police-Free Schools, our partners Alliance for Educational Justice and the Advancement Project. And that means we take up the police-free schools definition quoted as dismantling school policing infrastructure, culture, and practice, ending school militarization and surveillance, and building a new liberatory education system. And more recently have been looking at abolition through the lens of Ruth Wilson Gilmore when they speak to that abolition is about presence. It is about life-affirming institutions, and ultimately a liberatory and life-affirming educational system and institution, wherever that may be, is not possible with police presence, policing, criminalization happening in our schools.
Hey y'all, this is my name is Edgar Ibarra. I'm with Milpa, Motivating Individual Leadership for Public Advancement. We're based in Salinas, California. Home to like one of the biggest agribusinesses in the United States. So more than likely, if you're eating some lettuce, it's probably coming from our Salinas Valley, also along with our strawberries too, right? And one of the biggest things organizing that we've been doing here locally, along with other different partners in our area in the city of Salinas and throughout the region, is really focusing on the school resource officer, right? And we're starting to see that the intersectionality between not just the school district and the city, and where both are like in a way in cahoots, but also working together in order to establish the funds provided by the federal government. So what we're doing actively is engaging our community and meeting the community where they're at. A lot of the folks that we work alongside with are formerly incarcerated, youth who are formerly incarcerated, and folks who are reentry citizens who are reentering our community. And this in particular, it's something that like it's almost stigmatized in our community. A lot of the times we continue to hear amongst our own community, oh, ahí vienen los cholos, ahí vienen los los cualquieras, right? And it's kind of hard, to organize that way. But we've been doing it slowly and surely. But through palabra, through our word, and through our actions of really showing up, we always said that those who were once closest to the problem could be potentially closer to the solution, right? So we're really fond of that. But also organizing throughout the region has been particularly hard. Salinas Valley has 2 state prisons in the state of California that sit here: Salinas Valley State Prison and Soledad State Prison. They overshadow our valley. And it's been particularly hard organizing, trying to provide a different perspective of what would a school look like without SROs to communities where the only thing they've known is incarceration, the only thing they've known is over-policing. So the uphill battle for that to actually just continue to provide that different perspective and into what would a potential school look like without SROs or any type of law enforcement or any type of just security. There has been an uphill battle, but something that we take up on the challenge, just like our elders did, back in the day, and they continue to do today. And we remain strong. And so we're aiming for complete abolishment of just any school resource officer, law enforcement within the school setting. So, but most importantly, not forgetting that as we organize and as we continue to put in place many different things, the system's paying attention. They're taking notes at everything we're doing and everything. And so always just being mindful of what they're doing, and also being mindful of how we're organizing and how we're preparing for the next step. Tomo palabra.
We'll invite Jackie and then Jen to share with us.
Sorry, it says that my host has stopped my video, so I can't start the video. Good evening. It seems like my video won't start because the host has to open it, but I'll just start talking. My name is Jackie Byers. I'm with the Black Organizing Project in Oakland, California. We actually started a campaign in 2011 to eliminate the Oakland Unified School Police Department. This Oakland Unified School District is somewhat unique because Oakland actually has its own police force. So we don't just contract with city police. We actually have a full department with the chief, sergeants, rank and file inside the school district. Along with our own police department, we also have city police, the Oakland Police Department, that also comes on campus and responds particularly to charter schools. And we have a security force that is under the jurisdiction of the Oakland Unified School Police Department. So although they are unarmed security officers, they are under sort of the cultural jurisdiction and the supervision of the chief of Oakland Unified School Police Department. And so when we started this campaign in 2011, we started this campaign because a young man named Raheem Brown, who was 20 years old, was sitting in a car in the passenger seat on a school campus outside of a dance and was murdered by the Oakland Unified School District Police Department. And when we sort of researched and investigated the situation, we realized that there was an entire police force. There was no oversight. There was, a lot of folks didn't even realize that there was a police force in the school district. There was a lot of investments in policing, but other parts of the district were being gutted, like teachers and social workers and counselors. And so we decided that at a time also when the city had just, was still healing from what happened to Oscar Grant, and there had been a lot of attention to what was happening across the city in terms of BART Police and Oakland Police Department, that folks weren't necessarily paying attention to what was happening in the schools. And so we saw this as an important opportunity to raise the issue of what was happening in the schools, the issue of over-policing of Black youth. And we also thought it was important to raise the issue of police abolition in general. And so in 2011, we decided that our campaign would focus on removing police out of Oakland Unified School District by 2020. And we believe that although we started to work on certain reforms, that our ultimate goal was police removal. And a couple of years ago, we just stopped working on the reforms and decided that we needed to push for the full removal, and that to some degree, the reforms were getting in the way of the abolition. We found ourselves in the margins, and it was kind of a lonely place to be, except for some of the folks nationally that were working on this issue in places like Denver and places, folks who were really trying to move police-free schools. We also use that term as part of the Alliance for Educational Justice. The police-free schools term for us fits well because a lot of folks will trade one law enforcement agency for another. And for us, we want to be clear that we're talking about abolition of law enforcement, probation, sheriff's department, any kind of structure, and really investing in a new way of redefining safety for Black and Brown students. We also are calling for a Black sanctuary, which is a pledge to support true sanctuary in our schools that is inclusive of Black students as well as other immigrant students, Black and Brown students, all students, but really bringing Black families, Black students into the center of the conversations around sanctuary. Oh, and we are in the middle of a campaign right now. We have a resolution that is on the table June 24th, and it is the George Floyd resolution to eliminate the Oakland Unified School District Police Department. And so we are just I'm kind of in the middle of the fight right now, and we're hoping to win. on the 24th. So it's a big push right now. But thank you for inviting me, and look forward to the conversation.
Hey everyone, this is Jen Johnson from Chicago. I am currently the Chief of Staff at Chicago Teachers Union. I am a licensed high school history teacher. I taught for 10 years at one of the Chicago public schools that had 2 police officers every day in the building and had a police room. So, the Chicago Teachers Union, we represent 28,000 plus educators, active, retired, clinicians, counselors, all kinds of different folks from across the city in over 500 schools. We work with over 360,000 students across the city, 90% of whom are students of color. Nearly half of our students are Latinx, and more than a third are Black students. Currently, the state of affairs in Chicago is that at least 74 out of more than 90 of our high schools have 2 school resource officers assigned to them. And there are additional police patrols that often come in the morning at arrival or in the afternoon at dismissal time and surveil our students' entry and exit from the building. Currently, the school district has a $33 million annual contract towards this policing in schools. We at Chicago Teachers Union have really tried to engage in an evolution of our position over the last decade. I came into CTU as a part of a group of leaders from the Caucus of Rank and File Educators back in 2010. And for the last decade, we've tried to work with members and community to build what we consider to be a social justice brand of unionism, an organizing brand of unionism. And luckily, we've been a part of a national network of teachers unions who are like-minded, who are working with other labor allies to do things like bargaining for the common good, right? Really trying to think of our work as educators in the context of our students' lives. And so over the last decade, we've tried to build in coalition with community partners towards the vision of a just Chicago public school system, which actually does right by our Black and Brown students in particular. And it hasn't been easy. Like, I am so excited to hear from folks who have done this work and successfully and no longer have police officers in schools. And, we're seeing this wave take over cities around the country, which is incredibly exciting. And I hope that will help pull us in Chicago in the right direction. But I say that it's challenging because that's important to know, right? Our educators are of different backgrounds. 50% of our educators are white, whereas only 10% of our students are white. And many of them have not had the same kind of life experiences that our students have. And so we've really worked hard to try to bring people along to understand why students have been demanding police out of schools for years. This is something that our young people have led on and that we are catching up on. And we think that it's our duty to catch up and to make sure that we are honoring and respecting what our students say is what makes our schools safe. There's been some progress that we've definitely made, and we still have a long way to go. After the brutal murder of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald in 2014, we saw a sea change in Chicago. We saw organizations get more attention for the work they were already doing. Let me be clear about that. And we saw kind of a rise again in youth organizing. Black Youth Project 100 was incredibly important in that. The We Charge Genocide coalition of young people who went to the UN, basically calling out police injustice in our city. And this helped us as educators be able to point to their leadership and to take on the challenge of these difficult conversations with our educators. So we passed resolutions in our democratically elected House of Delegates, which is a representative group of educators who come together every month in order to support police reform, in order to support the ouster of elected officials who covered up Laquan McDonald's murder for months in order to try to get reelected. And we moved to support efforts that were community-led. One of the really important examples of that is in 2015, when organizers finally won, after decades of fighting, of the first ever reparations ordinance in American history for victims of police torture and survivors of police torture, one component of that ordinance, which was passed in 2015, was that a curriculum be developed. And we at the teachers union said, we need to be a part of that. We don't want to sit idly by and not be contributing to ensuring that the curriculum was well developed and would be taught in our schools. And that's still honestly a challenge. As with many mandates, it's an unfunded mandate in our school district. And so while the history of police torture in Chicago should be taught in every 8th and 10th grade classroom across the entire city, we know that there are educators who still resist teaching it. And we know there are principals who will not hold teachers accountable to teaching this important history, but also the victory of reparations. Reparations were won in Chicago, and the work continues to build a memorial to the torture survivors, to keep open a counseling center that was won. And so as a union, we've tried to be a part of and a participant to the leadership that our youth and other organizers are providing. So we've supported changes in state law to the school discipline code to ensure greater use of restorative practices and less encounters with police. But we've still seen policing go wrong in our schools. We had a really awful videotaped incident at one of our high schools a couple of years ago where a young woman, a student, was tased. And I recently watched a panel where her father talked about the lasting trauma that has been inflicted on her as a result of this encounter with a police officer in her school. So we've tried to follow our students, and that led to specifically providing contract proposals in our last contract. So before we went on strike in October of 2019, we proposed that police be reduced and that the dollar amount that is allotted for police in schools be redirected into wraparound services for our schools. And unfortunately, we still have people who are not clear on why abolition and why defunding is actually a clear demand. And so we're in a moment where we're trying to engage in that kind of dialogue, and where members are lifting up the voices of our young people from STOP, from Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, from Students Strike Back, have been out in the streets this last weeks saying their experiences and saying, why is it that $33 million can be spent on policing, but when I go to school, the computer lab is broken, right? And I can't access my education. Or now I'm at home doing remote learning, and I don't have access to the internet or an adequate device, or I'm sharing a device with my sister, but there's $33 million for policing. So, as a union, we've tried to move our positions closer and closer to the notion of a loving, just, and liberatory school setting, where we have more unarmed adults who do the work with our young people of listening to them. And this has led to concrete proposals and policies that we've supported, like sanctuary school language that we did win in our contract, elected officials who are championing at the county and the city and the state level policies to end the gang database, to soon, this coming week, introduce an ordinance that would actually end the authorization of that $33 million police contract in our schools. So I'm here to learn from everybody else who is further along on this. And I'm here to say that as a educator, as a Black educator myself, I need my fellow educators to understand that this is what students and organizers have been fighting for decades, and that we need to stop the debate. We know that the money can be better spent for prevention, and that we can create a new vision of what safe schools and safe communities look like.
So much wisdom on this call. I'm just so radically moved, and also just appreciate all the participants on this call's love and support for our tech Zoom moment. I just want to lift up, Edgar naming the people who are closest to the problem often have the solution. And I also just want to lift up all the panelists who've been working on this. I think Jackie mentioned starting in 2011, right? And I want to lift up Andrea's kind of win, but this long-term struggle, and Jen talking about the work over the long haul. I think it's just so important to recognize the labor that people have been doing for a long time to build this political moment. And I also just want to lift up the many shout outs we've had from all the panelists for all the young people that have been leading the way here. And I'm excited about our next panel, what's really centering youth organizing. I'm going to switch a little bit here to strategies and ask panelists, because I think what people are hungry for, what I keep hearing is, we want to do this. We want police-free schools. What should we, we're thinking about abolition. These conversations are growing. People are hungry about how to do this work, the specifics. So I'm wondering if we can have each of you talk a little bit from different kinds of contexts. I know that some of you are doing multi-generational organizing. Some of you are working particularly with educators within a labor union context. Some of you are working more directly with families and communities. Some of your work spans pre-K through post-secondary education. But can you focus on some strategies and tactics? They don't necessarily have to be ones that are I think we learn a lot from things that don't work as well. And I was really appreciative of Jackie's kind of note, thinking a little bit about reform, abandoning that as a strategy. I think that's really a great observation. But let's start with Jen and Edgar, kind of go a different direction this time. Maybe we'll start with you, Jen. And Jen, can you talk a little bit about, expand a little bit more on the Chicago Teacher Union's approach about political education and abolition? What are some challenges and what are some opportunities you found? And then we'll go to Edgar to talk a little bit about MILPA and how you're drawing on healing informed organizing to build people power to keep cops out of schools. So we're going to start with Jen.
Thanks, Erica. So I'll lay out a few strategies, and I just want to again say that we are not where I would want us to be, and it's a constant evolution. We're trying to grow into this work. I will say up front that the debate that folks are having around the country around the word defunding is happening within our union membership. I'm trying to help people understand what Miriam Kaba said in her New York Times editorial, that abolition means abolition, and that we need to not dance around these terms. And that's a challenge. Not everybody across our 28,000 members are on the same page. And so the political education has been ongoing, but it's especially sharpened in these moments, right? I keep telling everyone that the video of Rayshard Brooks alive and talking to the police is like haunting me these last several days. And I need educators who are resisting being comfortable with these terms that feel radical to them, like defund and abolition, to understand that this is life and death. And listening to someone who at one moment was very much alive and then another moment is murdered by a police officer is what we're talking about when we're talking about removing police out of schools. We've seen the incidences are documented. There's a great report from the Shriver Center called Handcuffs in Hallways that chronicles the Chicago public schools experience with police. I need people to understand that I'm going to have a hard time debating, because the debate is over to me. So in any case, our strategies include really working through our union's democratic spaces. And so we have a union constitution, we have elected delegates, they come together every month. So 500 plus folks from around the city normally come to in-person meetings every month and debate the direction of the union. So they have debated whether or not we would support a Black Lives Matter resolution every year for Black Lives Matters at School Week. And they have passed it 3 years in a row. And that resolution includes funding counselors over police. Folks may not think that and live that every day, but it was voted on and duly debated. We had a series of ways that we collect contract proposals. So bargaining for the common good, like I mentioned before, is a key strategy, is seeing your work in landing a contract as bettering the greater good, not just securing your own personal benefits and conditions for your work, but betterment of the city of Chicago that benefits our students and their families. And so we've bargained for additional unarmed, loving adults in our schools. We won in our recent strike more nurses, social workers, case managers, English language program teachers, restorative justice coordinators, counselors, homeless student advocates, librarians, and we won sanctuary school language for the first time. And so it's our job as a teachers union to, put our values into our contract. And that requires discussion, debate in various union bodies. And again, it's still going on. So the next part is the political education and leadership development. Something that I'm incredibly proud of that our union does well is identify leaders who are coming into their own in the union space and making room for them on our committees, finding ways for them to connect to the press, finding ways for them to write and to have their words shown and shared in our union magazine, lifting them up. We do a summer organizing internship every summer with 25 to 30 educators who learn how to be organizers. And a lot of the leaders that are pushing for police out of schools come out of that internship or come out of a tradition that is a racial justice and more radical tradition, or they've self-taught. We have a really great cadre of white educators who are leading some of these really tough discussions. So we make space. We have a human rights committee. We have Latinx and Black caucuses that have this dialogue and debate. We have a fiery members only Facebook page where this discussion is ongoing. And as we plan to think about how we reopen our schools after this period of closure due to COVID-19, we are asking our members to think about what safety looks like and whether police in schools is really the necessary priority in their safety plan. And so again, we have done this in partnership. So I would say that's the third strategy. So, bargaining for the common good is one. Political education and leadership identification, particularly of educators of color who can lead on this. And then the third is being in coalition. We don't, as a teachers union, operate alone, and that's not been by accident. We came into leadership at the CTU with coalition partners, grassroots organizations who we've maintained relationships with, who we look to for their leadership. And so when we sponsor rallies, when we do actions in order to push the idea of police out of schools or to support justice for, Rekia Boyd or for Laquan McDonald, we do it with coalition partners who are leading on these issues, because we as educators have everything to learn from the students, parents, families, and community who live in the neighborhoods where we work.
I guess for myself, once again, Edgar Ibarra, when we're talking about how MILPA approaches the work, healing informed organizing. So just to provide context, right? MILPA is a method of basically of agriculture and how when you plant beans, squash, and corn all together, right? And they all three of these plants grow together in harmony and are able to sustain one another and almost in perfect balance, right? Without any outside or real disruption. So when we're talking about how the healing informed is, we're trying to strike balance within our community and within ourselves. And I'll speak to my story in particular based on the fact that I went through the whole system. I entered juvenile institutions and adult institutions of incarceration. And when I was released, upon learning, taking the time to really educate myself, when I was in there reading books, as everybody knows, the education system within the carceral system sucks, so reading books and talking to the elders that were in there, that have been in there for years, and getting their perspective on what is it that we need, what do we need to do? And most of the time, everybody was angry, off top, the reality that we're incarcerated, but also the hope that was that, we just got to get it together. We just need to figure this out, and we need to do it for our families. So as I was released and coming back into the community and connecting back with folks who I knew from when I was a youngster, when I was just a young guy before entering the system at 14, hearing them talk about, healing. And I'm like, man, what is it you're talking about? Healing informed organizing, or just healing in general. And then they dropped La Cultura Cura. God knows what that meant, right? And so I was like, man, it put me in the state where what does it mean? And actually seeing what the community was actually, how they were organizing and coming together made sense. And the sense that everybody, it was not just about critically resisting the system, but it was actually about critically uplifting our own existence, acknowledging each other for what we've gone through, and where we're going and how we're going to get there together. And so that was really, really important. And I guess and I was super mad, just understanding of what was happening in 2014, the murder of 4 Latino men here in Salinas, and then just recently, last year, when the murder of Brenda Mendoza, and on March 1st by the police department after suffering a mental health breakdown, just put everything in perspective. How do we bottle like all this anger that we have inside? Is like, how are we gonna really like organize and like go, but not just organize from it, but heal from it too, you know? Because at the end of the day, we all this anger, this sentiment, we take it home. You know, a lot of our elders and our grandparents would say that we take back the susto, the trauma, el espanto, the miedo, the tristeza, the sadness, the el coraje, you know, the anger, the celos, the jealousy, everything, all these different emotions that are coming up from us, and this is how we're bringing back home. So when we really started talking about healing senses, we really started focusing on like the individual. How do we, once again, and I said it earlier, like how do we meet the folks when they're coming back from incarceration? They're coming back off the streets, straight off the streets, or folks are just actually have, you know, that the household might not be the perfect place. Like how do we meet them where they're at? And it was one of the most important things for me witnessing this, you know, but because it actually put in perspective my own humanity and what we needed to do, and specifically for myself, and how we needed to actually organize to really abolish and end all these systems of incarceration, not just here locally and in our own backyard, but throughout the nation and the world. You know, and I always revert back to one of the most daunting moments in my life was when I was in a juvenile state facility, and I looked, you know, through the hallway, and I was looking across as they were walking me back to my cell, and everybody in there was black and brown. Everybody in there, I did not see not just one white face, and in that moment, I was like, man, what's going on here? And I always think back to that moment of just like kind of like that, it popped, it clicked in me. I needed to know why, right? So I go back to the healing informed, and from that moment, that experience in itself really set me on a trajectory. And as we kind of like we're organizing here in the community, we always make sure that whenever we ask the community to go and like, hey, can you support us in all this? Is this what y'all want to do? We always make sure to provide a before and after place for healing. And healing is just when I use the term, is more of like a space to desahogarse, to just release, to come through and share that. Because most of the time, a lot of folks go up to that podium shaking, trembling, anxiety, or full of rage and anger of what has happened. And when they come in, they don't know how to like come back and be able to talk about it. So we always provide that opportunity, and we focus on the words and the teachings of our elders too. And I'm particular to always reflect back on some of my elders, Dennis, Yamamura, Tio Smiley Tochli, and also my Tio Guillermo Aranda, and also my tia Marcia Gallardo, and just think about them and what they've been able to share with me, and what's important for us. You know, we've experienced intergenerational trauma and experiencing intergenerational trauma today, but how are we going to move from that trauma into intergenerational healing? You know, specifically now what's happening today, what we've been seeing on TV, the murder of men, Black men in particular, at the hands of law enforcement. Folks are just taking all this in front of their TV, in front of in their hands and their phones, all that. They're watching this over and over and over again, and it's getting embedded in their heads. So it's like, how do we move to a place of healing, and not just for them, for themselves, but also for the next 7 generations? And what are we going to leave behind? What are we going to leave for the next 7 generations to have as a way of a legacy? And so the healing informed approach is just really, at the end of the course, once again, I say, just uplifting our existence at its root, you know, cherishing one another, embracing, appreciating one another is the most important thing. And also just sitting, and sometimes, you know, most of the time it's just being there with one another in solidarity. Not even, sometimes we don't have to say anything, we just got to be there. And we pose a lot of the time in doing this type of work, and just more organizing and shoulder to shoulder with the gente out there, and from the city councils to the school boards to the board of supervisors. We always like to pose the questions to them, and it goes back to W. Du Bois in The Ordeal of Man's Art. And I believe it was written almost 100 years ago, but I believe it's super relevant to what's going on today, and it's super relevant to just, you know, what's going on today and what's going to happen in tomorrow as well, right? And W. Du Bois poses the question of, what does integrity do in the face of oppression? What does honesty do in the face of deception? What does decency do in the face of insult? How does virtue face brute force? And every time I read those, and it's like, I'm always conflicted, you know. For me, you know, and the way I was brought up, and the way from the streets to the system, we've only known one way, and one way, and that was complete violence. Understanding the healing practice of it, and understanding these questions in its essence for myself, I've come to see that, you know, that if I accept my existence, I can accept everyone else's. And we try to say that as well. So when we're talking about the school resource officer, there is no room for a school resource officer in any of our schools. We need more counselors. We need more culturally relevant and healing informed practices at our schools. We need more transformative justice programs, restorative justice programs. We need more Doña Marias, more Doña Juanas at the school. You know, just being there to share a consejo, a dicho with us. You know, we need, you know, sometimes we just need the opportunity to just go there and have that grandmother feeling just right there with us, you know, of just knowing that we're safe. You know, for myself, nothing has made me feel more safe than just being around my grandmother, and bringing those community leaders, those leaders of our families and leaders of our communities, the most important thing for myself, and to show that to the community, that it's not just the young people, we're all in it, you know. We're all in it for the next 7 generations, and you know, the health and wellness of our young people is the healing of our people. So investing in the young people and investing in more opportunities for them to be successful, but not in the terms that white people determine success, or this racist system has determined success, but the way we determine success, and reimagining that, I think, is the most important thing. Palabra.
Thank you to both of you. There are just so many people that make this work possible, and I think both your perspectives spoke to the necessity of community, necessity of coalition, and political education to really leverage this multi-generational knowledge, and also the necessary healing. I love what you were speaking to, Edgar, about creating these spaces of healing within our organizing to be necessary, and so that we're building healing informed practices and alternatives in our schools, which are so necessary. And so I want to keep talking about strategy with Andrea now, and was hoping you could tell us a bit more about what LAEN's entry point has been to push for police-free schools in Toronto, and just share some of the strategies that organizers in Toronto have used to do this. And then also, can you share a bit about what has happened since the removal of student resource officers, and what are some key takeaways?
Yeah, of course. And, you know, definitely want to begin with acknowledging and recognizing that the resistance against the Toronto District School Board School Resource Officer Program was happening since the inception in 2008, such as folks, you know, from Jane and Finch Action Against Poverty. There was a group called No Cops, and among others, also students, including from Toronto District School Board's own Northern Secondary School, protested against the program. And for a multitude of reasons, the continued push for the removal at that time of the program was not sustainable. Our particular entry point of LAEN into the work for pushing for police-free schools really came out of the result of youth voicing to us their experiences at a LAEN conference in 2014. The issue was then made immediately part of our 3-year action plan. And so since 2015, we had started to have, you know, meetings, community events, raising awareness around these issues. There was educator knowledge exchanges that really saw, you know, education of community organizers simultaneously at the times when educators were being provided the same information, and then bringing them together. So really having a praxis of bringing community into the classroom. In 2017, what had happened was a little 6-year-old Black girl was handcuffed at their wrists and ankles at a Greater Toronto area school called the Peel Region District School Board. This is what had actually catapulted a partnership with Black Lives Matter Toronto and LAEN. And as a support, we supported Black Lives Matter, Toronto's lead for a school board walkout for Black Lives. The Toronto District School Board Director of Education, John Malloy, and the Executive Superintendent, Jim Spiropoulos, at that time, Executive Superintendent of Equity, Engagement, and Wellbeing, were the ones who had actually shown up. And this was a space where there was call board, among others, in regards to dismantling. Within this space, pointing questions around the SRO program were able to be asked by the other line co-director, who I am humbled, and grateful to be working alongside, Silvia Gentina Arauz. So simultaneously, while this is happening, there was a multiracial coalesce, such as educators, as well as principals that supported this removal among community members, students, youth, elders. And so, Alain, since we were already organizing around the Latinx push-out rate at the Toronto District School Board, we were really able to see the power of leveraging, relationships that were built over the years, right? Being able to have those vulnerable conversations, being able to be, be in a space and be willing to be within this unlearning and relearning process with folks within these institutions. And so we were able to push an equity lens throughout the whole review process and ensured that the review process was community driven. We had decided, as an inside-outside strategy, which is just ensuring to things be community driven, that we decided to be at that table through and through. What we saw, among other tactics, which I'll speak to, but fundamentally the historical decision to remove police, to remove the school resource officer program from the largest school board in Canada was anchored by an equity lens. And it's noted within the Toronto District School Board SRO program review, which I'll actually just read directly. It's on page 1 of the report. And so it actually stated, quote, "Primary goal of the review was to capture and center the voices of those students, families, and communities who have traditionally been excluded, marginalized, and or discounted," end quote. So this equity lens was established upon the inception of the review. It was applied through all phases, including community consultations with partnership organizations such as Success Beyond Limit, including also LAN, the data analysis, and the decision-making to remove the program. Other tactics and tools that we utilized at LAN was school resource officer program information sessions and community call to actions. The reality was that a lot of parents, guardians, caregivers, educators, and even students themselves didn't actually know that they had stationed police officers in their schools. And so this was a way to, create a community hub and start getting additional folks involved into the push against the SRO program. We had also compiled digital storytelling. We were able to capture lived experiences and stories of youth. And that is qualitative data. That's not anecdotal stories, how a lot of folks try to paint it as. Lived experiences are qualitative data and are fundamental to ensuring that people understand the lived impact of police presence in schools. Both LION and other coalition partners utilize the Toronto Police Services Board as a space to highlight these issues, to bring awareness to this, to bring conversations to the kitchen table, to educational spaces, to workspaces. It was really to galvanize media to, ensure that this information was being focused on, that there is police presence in schools. Petitions were made, and the petitions garnered over 1,000 folks in support of the removal of the SRO program. Among other tactics, there were artivism pieces, right? Really showing in a strong way how art can really signify and depict the harms of police presence in school and showing the differentiations as to how, in comparison to their white counterparts, how particularly Black African diasporic students, undocumented students, disabled students, among other intersectional identity markers, are impacted by this. And there was always continuous pressure, emailing school board trustees. And for us, the focus was on school board trustees because they were the decision makers to remove the SRO program. We didn't have to wait to, try to get the support from Toronto Police Services Board meeting, because at the end of the day, school board trustees, school board members were able to make that decision. What's really exciting since the SRO removal at the Toronto District School Board, actually in their Caring and Safe Schools annual report for 2018 to 2019, which was actually released a few months ago, it actually shows data post-SRO removal landscape. Some of the key findings really indicated that there was a shift, this cultural shift away from punitive disciplinary practices. And instead, the most used interventions by schools were contacting the parent, guardian, guidance support, social work support, and restorative practices. And with this culture shift, we actually saw that the number of suspensions dropped 24% in comparison to the 2016-2017 school year, when the SRO program was still live in the Toronto District School Board. The number of expulsions plummeted 53%, 53% than in the school year of 2016 to 2017. And the data at the Toronto District School Board actually shows us that if a student gets expelled, the likelihood of them graduating is 10 to 15%. Right? So imagine just by, removing the SRO program and really pushing towards a paradigm shift that is more relationship-centered, healing-centered engagement, and grounded in restorative and transformative justice practices, the immense impact, positive impact that this happens to students, right? And since then, since the removal of the SRO program, data also shows that no one has indicated that they feel, less safe because of police not being in schools. And what's fundamental, I think, at the Toronto District School Board, in the context when the SRO program was removed, the Liberal government was in power. And whether it be, in these past decades, whether it has been the Liberal government or the Conservative government, there has been an underfunding and under-resourcing of our educational system. And so the changes that were done at the Toronto District School Board were really reallocating the resources that they already had and ensuring that they were able to, use those resources in a more equitable manner and a way that can support all students. There was a creation of the Black Student Success and Excellence Strategy. There was the work with the Caring and Safe Schools Department, working alongside Ma'at Legal Services, addressing inequities in suspension and expulsion processes, along with the Legal Aid Ontario funded the Plug program. And since then, we've also been able to see local organizing that has been pushing for the removal of their SRO program in the Greater Toronto area, places including, but not limited to, Hamilton, by folks such as the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, Kids Need Help Youth Collective, and Peel region, which we had asked for the removal of a couple of years ago, but now there's a renewed call for this by folks from Peel Advocacy. We see in the Waterloo region, by the African, Caribbean, and Black Network of Waterloo region and the Students for Inclusive Schools Collective, and even across Canada, and even across post-secondary school campuses such as, the Cops Free Campus Collective at McMaster University. And also there's been organizing to keep police out in the first place, such as the recent win by the Black Liberation Collective and the Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy at Ryerson University. And so these are things that fundamentally build off of each other. You know, a win here is a win there, a win there is a win here. We are all fundamentally in this together. And I'll definitely be able to, you know, speak to some fundamentals and key takeaways from our work here for police-free schools later on in upcoming questions that could definitely connect with it.
Thanks so much, Andrea. It's so incredibly useful. Jackie, can we bring you in and build on this fabulous discussion about strategy to have you talk a little bit? I know you're right in the middle of a really important campaign right now. Can you share a little bit about tactics and strategies the Black Organizing Project has been working with, in particular, given its sort of multi-generational organizational structure? Thanks.
Certainly. Again, I need permission to start the video, apparently. So it keeps saying to me, my host has to start it.
I think we can get that fixed if you don't mind starting to talk first. Thanks so much, Jackie.
No problem. So yeah, for us, we are multi-generational parents, students, and community members. So when we first started the Black Organizing Project, it was a multi-generational organization, and we hadn't, you know, identified a specific issue. So we didn't start the organization on this issue. We started the organization because, you know, in Oakland, we sit in a legacy of Black liberation, and a legacy of a lot of progressive politics, but we were also seeing that the Black community in Oakland, you know, in terms of unemployment, in terms of police violence, in terms of all the issues that could affect anyone, was disproportionately affecting Black folks in Oakland. And although it was critical to build a multiracial, you know, front, and we were seeing sort of an invisibilizing of Black people and Black leadership at the time. And now there's a lot more conversations about centering Black leadership, but at the time, it still was kind of a push, even within our multiracial organizations, to push for the importance of talking specifically about what was happening with Black people. And so when we decided to take on this issue, we knew that we would take on this issue as a multi-generational community organization, because one of the things we also know and have seen is that some of the issues, number one, it was important for us to organize as a Black community, and number two, we've seen stuff like youth curfews and gang injunction issues where sometimes the opposition will utilize like Black parents, for example, to counter a more radical politic by Black youth or youth of color. So we wanted to really do something that brought everyone together to really address this issue. We also know that a lot of community folks, maybe transitional youth who were just graduated or been pushed out of the Oakland school system and still had a vested interest. There's a lot of harm that comes with when people are pushed out of the school system or pushed into the criminal justice system. And so being able to engage those folks and being able to do something to be able to address the very systems that they've been impacted by was important. And also parents who have students inside the school system are also parents who were pushed out or had interactions with law enforcement as well. So that's sort of the structure of our organization. We use community organizing and believe in community organizing to actually to address systems issues. And so for us, it's important to have folks that are impacted as the people that are making the strategy decisions, that are doing the research, and that are developing the vision. And for me, I guess that's really important in this moment for me. And I just want to also pause just to say that, like, the folks that are on this panel, like Edgar, you know, we're part of the Dignity in Schools California campaign. And I know the risks that, you know, Milpa has taken to address this issue, bringing Black and Brown people together to specifically address the issue of law enforcement in schools is at great risk. And I know the work, I know that the work that folks are doing on the ground is often invisible, but it is what has got us to this point. So it's amazing and it's inspiring to see across the country that, you know, we're hearing about defunding police. We're hearing about abolition of police departments in schools, and it's beautiful to see that a conversation that was once seen as marginal is now a conversation that's happening in the center. But what I also want to just make sure we address is that it has been decades of youth who have fought and taken radical positions when no one else would, and also organizations and Black-led organizations that with very little resources have been resilient and have been pushing for this fight. So as we build this united front and as enthusiasm grows, I think it's very critically important nationally for people to recognize those local organizations that have been working on this issue and to take the leadership from those organizations and from those community members. And it's both important on a principle level, because honestly, part of what we struggle with as movements in general is the erasure of organizing, of grassroots organizing, and we put too much into sort of like large kind of shallow analysis of how change happens. And by really telling the stories of organizing, it recognizes that organizers are not just there to say this doesn't work, but organizers are the ones who do the data crunching. Organizers are the ones, and when I say organizers, I mean community members. I don't mean just staff. I mean, they're there at the tables figuring out the research. A lot of our members know the data better than the school district knows the data. And they are the experts, and not just in some sort of token way, but because they actually do the work. And so one of the things that we had to fight just to get to this point is not just the opposition, but we had to fight within progressive circles that often dismissed us, often invisibilized us, often didn't believe in not only our position, but didn't believe in our capacity to win. And so as we're celebrating these moments, it's important to know that this moment had to meet actual work that was happening. And I think it's also important for us, not just on principle, to pay attention to that organizing in the local organizations, but also on a very practical level, because we know that these institutions are going to revert back to new forms of criminalizing. So if we get rid of police departments, they're going to look at contracts. If they're ending contracts, they're going to look at their own police departments, like in places like New York, where Urban Youth Collaborative and other groups are trying to fight to make sure that the city of New York doesn't try to do what Oakland is doing. We also know that they will use surveillance or they will use probation departments. So it takes the folks that have been fighting this fight to be at the table transforming it. And with that said, I'm also grateful that, yes, we have alliances with the Teachers Union, the Oakland Education Association, as well as the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers came out in support of us, as well as the Alameda Labor Council came out in support of us, and in spite of the so-called police union that spoke against us, and they took a stand as labor, and that's really important. But even with our allies, we had to have tough conversations with our teacher allies, because part of why we have an issue of criminalization is because not just the fact that we have a police department, but we have teachers and administrators that are calling law enforcement on students, on Black students. And so we have to hold accountable even our allies to say, all right, we need you to also look at your own anti-Blackness and the fact that you're also complicit in this as well. And if you can be a real ally, if you could be a real solidarity, then you're willing to follow the leadership of the people in the community. You're willing to support Black leadership, and you're willing to have tough conversations about what your role is and how you've been complicit. And I think that with all of that in mind, we have a real chance to not only abolish a system that has been historically brutalizing us since the first Africans were brought here, but also to build something that actually could be transformative. But we're not going to do it in a comfortable way. We have to do it with real conversations and real accountability, not just for our opposition, but for our allies. And so what is our strategy? Our strategy is community organizing. with the community that has been impacted, the community of students, the community of parents, a community of Black people that are in alliance with other folks, but are taking leadership and have been not only in the street, but they've also been the ones who are developing the people's plan, the ones who are proposing the vision, and the ones who will transform the system.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We're looking at the time here, and we know that we're coming close to the end of our webinar, but we really wanted to work through a couple more questions. And so one thing that people are often asking about is, okay, so defund, divest, but where does the money get reinvested? And this idea of safer schools has come up a few times during our conversation. And so I was wondering if quickly each of you could speak to maybe one way you think the money could meaningfully be reinvested to create safer schools. Just perhaps one point. We can start with Edgar.
I think one way we can start making safer schools is just, well, it's a few ways, but I'll be quick and precise, is focusing on the curriculums and the textbooks, and ensuring that they're anti-racist, ensuring that we're hiring anti-racist teachers. Also, and once again, defining our success from an anti-racist lens and being more centered around our community and community needs. Palabra.
Andrea, you're welcome to jump in, and then Jen and Jackie.
Yeah, something that doesn't even, well, we really have to look at our paradigm shifts, from legislation that's anchored in punitive disciplinary practices, policing and criminalization of students, to one that is based in transformative justice practices, healing-centered engagement that is relationship-centered. And so one of the ways is to invest funding to properly fund our educational systems and have that funding be equity-led.
I'd echo everything that Edgar and Andrea said, and just add that when I get this question, I think about Laquan McDonald, the 17-year-old who was shot 16 times and killed by police, who lived in foster care and attended at least 2 Chicago public schools that were subsequently closed. This is a young man who was let down by all the leaders and institutions in his life, and we've got to dismantle the broken systems, the intentionally broken systems, and we need leaders in order to do that. So something that is critical is fighting for leaders who do represent us, who come from the movement, leaders like Alderman Jeanette Taylor, who is helping push the ordinance to end the authorization of police in Chicago schools. She was also on the diet hunger strike, where she went on a hunger strike for 34 days in order to reopen the only neighborhood public high school in her community on the south side of Chicago. And we fought with her and other community partners to then make that school a sustainable community school. So we need sustainable community schools which have the curriculum that Edgar talked about, that is invested in, like Andrea talked about, that uses parent engagement programs like the Parent Mentor Program, that has nurses. We had to strike for 11 days in order to get a commitment to, over 5 years, have a nurse in every school. We shouldn't have to do that, particularly now that we see the effects of a global pandemic. I can't just pick one, though. I gotta say, we have to end standardized testing. The pandemic has showed we do not need punitive testing systems that further serve to create false narratives about what our children can and cannot do, and about what schools are succeeding and failing. And we need to do things like ongoing professional development and training, because as was already said, I think Jackie said it, it's not enough to remove police in schools to end the kind of carceral setting that schools can be for our Black and brown young people. We need ongoing training with educators, students, parents, and community to unpack the racism that is embedded, the racism really and capitalism that are embedded in our school systems, in order to rebuild and re-envision the kind of loving school environment we need. This also requires safe communities. We can't just have schools be a safe zone. We have to work in partnership to get every single community what they need. And that means that educators, as was already said by Jackie, I think, have to get involved in the fights for justice for our communities. We cannot just be focused on what our schools need.
Okay, I seem to have the little video glitches, but yeah, I just would want to add to what everyone else says. I agree with everything everyone said. I think the point around the city police is important point. You know, when a young person has encounters with housing police, BART police, city police, and school police, we need to look at abolishing all of those policing systems. We need to take all of the resources that were funding those systems and give it back to the people. Also repairing the damage and harms that have already been done. We have a people's plan that we've already developed that really lays out a process for how students could be at the table to design what they want their schools to look like. And we need to invest in the revision or the vision of them. So I think, you know, there's a lot of stuff people have already said, and I would just underscore that the students need to be at the table designing the type of schools they want and making sure that we invest in their vision. And that, to me, it's very simple. It's not that complicated. We just basically need to defund all of it and reinvest in public systems like also health, housing, all the things that make communities work. Schools are a microcosm, but they're not siloed against all the other things that are happening in the community. So you can't remove the cops out of school and then be harassed by city cops. So we have to look at this as a whole and work with all the other forces that are also fighting on these other fronts.
Well, I'm just so honored to be here and all the wisdom that folks are putting on the table. We have time for maybe one more 1 minute lightning round per person. If folks want to either react to other things that people suggested before we have to close out. I just want to lift up the struggles that people have been working on for decades and, of course, centuries before, and just name just an echo of what Jackie is reminding us, all this invisible labor that has brought us to this moment. But I do think we're in a particular moment where defunding or divesting from police has gotten a lot of visibility. How do we grow that movement? If there's anything else that you want to add in a 1 minute lightning round, and maybe we'll start with you, Jackie, and we'll go Jackie, Andrea, Edgar, and then Jen.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, you know, we're in a moment where we need to look at all of this nationally and, you know, just fight for, I mean, we have so many people that have come out in support of what's happening in Oakland and really get behind the fights that are happening locally. When we strengthen those fights on a local level, I think we have opportunities to raise things on a national level. And so I just want to say I've appreciated the support from a lot of people that are already on this call that are paying attention and helping us push through in Oakland. And I think that Oakland needs to be helping push through in New York and Arizona. And we all need to be looking at the fights on the ground and looking at this as a national and international movement, and really an opportunity to have deeper conversations and deeper political conversations with our bases. So that this opens something up and is not just the end of something.
Brilliant. Edgar?
As for myself, just even thinking about what everyone else has said is just, I think is really looking at all the school boards and really looking at like the way they're interacting with the community, electing folks who really represent us, but also even thinking about like, if for any reason and it crosses their mind to fund police, they shouldn't even be on those boards. They should be focusing on learning. They should be focusing on building an environment that is the overall healing informed and culturally relevant for the students. And once again, is just if any school board's even thinking about funding police or anything, it's like we really need to reassess what are they doing there, and what are their best intentions and interests for our people.
Andrea?
Yeah, several quick things, reframing terms and discourses around safe and safety that many times get taken up as equating to police and policing, and thinking about it as healthy, carrying healthy, equitable schools, which in and of itself is already safe. We take up the Black Lives Matter Toronto social justice framework as we will win as a social justice framework. And it's important to remember that winning police-free schools is possible. It already has been done. And to push towards liberatory education, if folks aren't going to be supporting police-free schools future everywhere, to just stay out of the way. Because as Jackie had mentioned, it's important that we don't replicate same oppressive structures by asking for reforms, whether that be less police presence, more training or more diversity in the school police force representation, or instead of having police in schools, to change them for security guards or school safety officers, or even technological surveillance. The reality is that our movements for police-free schools are not to be co-opted. And we need to start debunking myths such as whether it be police in one school, some school, or all schools. The reality is it doesn't matter how the police in schools program looks like. It's that it has detrimental impacts and the system has to go. And to fundamentally connect our movements across colonial borders. And we're really humbled and grateful to be part of this international movement for police-free schools alongside U.S. freedom fighters and our partners in this fight, such as Alliance for Educational Justice, Advancement Project, Philadelphia Student Union, Black Organizing Project, Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, Communities for Just Schools Fund, and so many more. And we will win.
I want to
Yes.
echo that we will win. And I think, I'll just say that there's a few things that we've got to do in order to make sure we win. Number one, I'm just going to reiterate, listen to students. If high school students joke that they shouldn't get sick on a Tuesday because the nurse isn't in the building, then our priorities are wrong. And if our students are telling us that police should be out of schools, then we need to listen. And there should be a nurse in every school every single day of the week. The resources, number two, are in our cities. The current mayor said that she was going to reverse a decision by the previous mayor to fund a $95 million police training facility, and then she walked that back. If there's $95 million for a police training facility whose budget is already overblown, then it appears there's a priority, all right, of who we're training. We're going to false reform police, a department that's already not following the consent decree. Why is 95 million plus still going to a training academy when we should be providing the resources that our communities need? We can get creative. 3, we can reimagine. So many organizations are teaching us how to do this. We, during this global pandemic, had to switch our teaching jobs entirely online. We put together a grassroots television show for students without internet. Why don't we have free municipal Wi-Fi? If we can put together a TV show on short notice, then surely we can think of other ways to provide resources to our students. And then we've got to continue to call out these false choices. In Chicago, our local school councils are governing bodies of schools, and they've been told that it's their job to vote the police out of each individual school. That's unfair when you don't present new resources for that school. So people are presented with a false choice where they have to reject a resource, the only resource they know, an inadequate resource, a resource that is not serving them, but they're not provided anything else. So we need to listen to the aldermen who are calling for the ending of the police contract with the Chicago Public Schools, and continue to call out these false choices. The resources are there and we can invest them in our schools and in our communities.
Yes, I could keep listening to all of you. We need to keep listening to all of you. We're out of time. Otherwise, I would love to just reiterate just some of the important points. This rejection of reforms, rejection of an austerity logic, this strong, fierce reminder to center youth of color leadership, right? Just so much brilliance here, really important. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come and share strategies today, to talk about the genealogies of some of this work, to lift up your partners, to give us a sort of a snapshot of the incredible work that is going on at this moment and the legacies that that builds on, and to give us ideas about how to work in our own locations. I want to thank you and all the people that you work with for making this moment possible. I think that is so central. And I want to encourage people on the call to use the chat box and to share resources that are happening in your location. And to close out, we're going to turn to Stephanie and then Farima. And I just want to thank all of you, our panelists, our tech folks, our ASL folks, our captioner, for all the time and the labor that went into making this webinar possible. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie with that short and rushed but incredibly heartfelt acknowledgement of your time today.
Yes, I'm echoing everything that Erica just said in terms of thank you to everyone on this call and everyone who did behind the scenes work. If you are interested in rewatching this, rewinding it, or sharing it forward, the video will be available on Education for Liberation Network's Facebook page as well as YouTube page. So it's being recorded and it's available for you to view after this. I just want to plug that in 2 weeks from today at the same time, we have our third webinar of June, and it will be on youth organizing. And so it's entitled Young People Are Healers Too. We invite you to look out for that and to register and be part of that conversation. It'll be a great panel of young folks who are doing great work. And then following this call, if you're registered through the Eventbrite, we'll send through some follow-ups and discussion questions to keep this conversation going, as well as sharing resources, including the reports that Andrea mentioned earlier in the call. A few people in the comments had mentioned that they were interested in that. And information about how to stay informed and interested in the toolkit that, again, we will have coming out, Lessons in Liberation, in 2021. So thank you and have a good night. I'm going to pass it over to Farima.
You're on mute.
Sorry, y'all. I'm over here talking like y'all can hear me. Apologize for that. Just want to say thank you for being with us. And in the spirit of solidarity, I want to share the collective belief from activist, academic, and artist Leela Watson and the Aboriginal activist groups when they say, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And so as we leave this conversation, I ask that each of us really think about what that means for us right now. There is so many points of entry. And just like the last webinar that we had, it's really important for us to collectivize in this moment. And it's not the type of collectivizing where we think that we have all the tools and answers, but it's really about figuring out who has already been doing the work and how do we honor the work that has been done and really learn how to follow, learn how to listen, learn how to put our resources towards these movements, and doing that with grace and humility and with the spirit of solidarity. And so with that said, what is one intention that you want to set as you leave this conversation? What is your point of entry? What is your next step? Where can you get in where you fit in? Maybe it's simply, I won't, be a teacher or I won't be a police officer dressed in teacher's clothing, right? Like, let's just keep it real. There's some internal work that needs to be done. Maybe it's around standardized testing. Maybe it's around community organizing. Where do you fit in and what is that next step? And I believe in the power of intention. And so if you put that shit in the chat, it is more likely that you might actually have some integrity around what you write and do that. And so as you write these comments, I also think that it will give inspiration to other folks to think about how they can think about their entry point as well. And so thank you, y'all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's continue to engage in this struggle together, because if you haven't realized from this conversation, then please revisit and remember that we will win. Some folks have already won. And so we will win too. Thanks, y'all.